Thank you, Ambassador Sales, for taking time and sitting down with us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
In your recent op-ed published in Washington Post, you argued that China's attack on Uyghurs in Uyghur region is not a counterterrorism, but an ugly repression. So what do you mean by that? Can you elaborate?
Well, we know that the Chinese Communist Party has detained more than 1 million Uyghur men, women, and children in camps, in forced labor camps in the region. And the camps are really just the tip of the iceberg, because in addition to the people who are in custody in these forced labor camps, there's millions more who are subjected to political re-indoctrination in daytime facilities. The scope of this campaign is so vast and so untargeted that it simply has nothing to do with terrorism. Instead, what's going on is the Chinese Communist Party is waging war on religion. It is trying to stamp out the ethnic, linguistic, cultural, and religious identities of the people that it's been targeting.
So basically, you're saying that China is oppressing Uyghurs under the guise of counterterrorism.
That's right. Every nation has the right and the responsibility to defend itself and to defend its citizens from actual terrorism. That's not what's going on here. This is an ugly campaign of religious and ethnic repression.
China says otherwise. They're saying that they're training them for jobs, new skills, and they're treating their sickened mind with radical ideologies. Do you agree?
It's just not true. You don't need to send people who have jobs to vocational training centers. And again, the scope of the detentions, the scope of the measures that have been applied to people outside the camps is simply so vast and overwhelming that it belies any claim that this is counterterrorism or a targeted job training program. It's repression, plain and simple.
Have you ever raised with China that it's not fighting terrorism in Uyghur region and it has to stop?
Well, I don't want to get into the private diplomatic conversations that U.S. government officials have with our counterparts for reasons that I'm sure you can understand. But I don't think there can be any doubt on the part of the Chinese Communist Party where the United States stands on this question. Secretary Pompeo has been very public about our concerns. I've been public about our concerns, and others have as well. So I think the position of the United States on this question is well known.
What are the countermeasures the U.S. government is planning to, considering taking to discourage China from taking another further steps or increasing its oppression in the region?
Well, the first and most important thing is to maintain public pressure on the Chinese Communist Party to continually emphasize that this is a violation of the fundamental right to religious liberty, a principle that is foundational here in the United States and that is applicable all around the world. Keeping the public pressure on to convey the United States' view that this is not counterterrorism but repression. As far as more concrete or tangible responses that we might pursue, the United States doesn't telegraph any actions that we are considering or might be taking, but rest assured this issue has the attention of the highest levels of our government, and we're going to continue to focus on it.
And it has been more than 2 years since China started rounding up millions of people, basically most of them are innocent people, and placing them in this massive internment camps. And even some scholars and observers would call it concentration camps. Unfortunately, the media attention to this issue has been dissipated, and some scholars warn that this is exactly what China wants, the diminished media attention to the issue. In the wake of these developments, what kind of plan or actions U.S. government is planning to take with like-minded governments to bring more light on this issue?
Well, we're going to keep talking about it. The United States is a nation that's committed to religious liberty. The United States is a nation that has led the world in developing counterterrorism measures to respond to actual terrorist threats. And we're going to continue to make our views and our concerns known publicly. We also need to work with our like-minded partners. It's especially important, we think, for governments representing Muslim-majority nations to speak out. For members of their religion who are being targeted because of their religion, and to call on the Chinese Communist Party to stop this war on faith.
And what do you think China is aiming to achieve to lighten up millions of innocent Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Turkic peoples, and even their kids, young kids.
Right. I think what we're seeing now is just one more step in a long path that the Chinese Communist Party has been taking since its inception. The Communist Party of China is fundamentally hostile to religion. And they are hostile because they see religious belief, religious practice as a threat to the monopoly of power that the party enjoys in China. And so when we see the party oppressing Chinese Muslims and ethnic minorities, we have to understand that against the backdrop of other anti-religious steps that the party has taken for many decades, including measures against Christians, measures that the party has taken against Tibetan Buddhists, members of Falun Gong, and so on. The Communist Party of China has declared war on religion, and it has been at war with religion for many decades.
Yes, in your article also you mentioned that it's not only a religious issue, I believe. You said that it's also linguistic, cultural, and their identities. Do you believe that it's simply a religious issue that China is dealing with in those areas, especially in Uyghur region, or it's more than that?
It's more than that. The effort to stamp out peaceful religious practice is certainly fundamental to what we're seeing here, but the campaign goes beyond that. We're seeing children forcibly removed from their parents, put into state-run orphanages where they are taught only Han Chinese, where their names are changed without consent, where they are effectively being separated from the cultural and linguistic heritages that from which they come.
And some scholars believe that China is committing state terrorism or cultural genocide, or even some observers would argue that they're committing genocide already by jailing millions of innocent people, and as well as creating a dystopian police state in the region. What's your take on that?
Well, whatever label you use to describe the campaign, it's clear that this is a campaign that has nothing to do with counterterrorism and has everything to do with expanding the power of the party and repressing religious, ethnic, and other minorities that are seen as a threat to the power of the state.
Some scholars argue that China's oppression of Uyghur people and other Turkic Muslims in the region started right after 9/11 terrorist attack, since the Bush administration labeled an obscure and small organization called East Turkestan Islamic Movement as foreign terrorist organization. And do you believe, or do you think that America has played an indirect role in China's oppression of Uyghur people and other Turkic Muslims?
Not at all. Our position has been clear since 9/11. There are terrorist threats around the world that threaten all nations, and all nations have an important role to play in countering these terrorist threats, whether it's from groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or Hezbollah or other Iran-backed terrorist organizations. But counterterrorism cannot be a pretext for advancing a domestic agenda of political or religious or ethnic repression.
Many scholars question the existence of East Turkestan Islamic Movement or ETIM, and some scholars and some observers even argue that it doesn't even exist. But while it exists in the State Department's FTO list, and the State Department has considered removing it from the list, or is there any other measures that have been taken to eliminate this organization from the list?
Well, we don't publicly comment on internal deliberations that might or might not be taking place about designations. What I can tell you is, more generally, we are constantly evaluating evidence that's publicly available, intelligence information that comes to us through our various sources and methods, to make sure that our terrorism lists are fully updated.
So China used ETIM again, to launch a wholesale attack, oppression on Uyghurs. And do you think that America made a mistake? I mean, the Bush administration made a mistake by labeling this organization as a foreign terrorist organization.
Well, I can't relitigate a decision that was made by different officials in a different era many years ago. What I can tell you is that today the United States is deeply concerned about the misuse of counterterrorism by the Communist Party of China to initiate and sustain a years-long campaign against the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities.
What kind of message do you have to the Chinese officials who are committing these crimes against humanity, as many scholars or human rights organizations would call them, who are indirectly have responsibilities in these issues?
Stop. Close the camps. Release the prisoners. Dismantle the surveillance state that keeps track of people outside the camps. Return the children to their families so that they can be brought up in the culture and religious traditions that they hold dear.
Do you have anything to say to the Uyghur people around the world who are desperately waiting for a positive end to these crises?
This is not the first time a state has declared war on religion. When a state tries to undermine faith, faith always prevails. Take heart in the history of other repressed groups that have faced this kind of persecution before, and know that faith is always stronger than a repressive state.